My name is Wildfire. If you were to see me, you might think I'm around 19 years old. I'll admit it, I turn a lot of heads. I've got brown hair and eyes, and my skin is so tan, it almost looks bronze. I also tend to catch people's attention with my outfits, but that's a story for later. Now, you might wonder why I go by just one name. Well, that's part of the mystery of my origin. Yes, I said origin. Because I'm different. It started in a strange way. From the moment I was born, I knew I wasn't like everyone else. I was a mutant. My parents raised me as any other child, but I could tell I had an unusual effect on people around me. It turned out that being near me amplified the powers of other mutants, often focusing them in unexpected ways. And no, it wasn't something glamorous like super strength, but it was still something. That wasn't the only thing that made me different, though. There was a secret, one I wouldn't discover until later, and it would have serious consequences for many. At birth, I was David Lamb. I was a great student, especially in the study of mutations. By 15, I had finished high school, by 18, I completed college, and by 21, I had a PhD in biology. Right around my 18th birthday, my parents revealed the truth about my heritage, but it was shrouded in mystery. As I dove deeper into my studies, I learned more, but I decided to use my knowledge and powers for a purpose. I had known about the X-Men and Professor X's school for mutants for some time, and soon realized I had a way to conceal my true nature. I thought the best way to introduce myself was with impact. I approached the mansion, the home of the school, and stopped hiding my mutation. It wasn't long before Cerebro, their system, detected me. The professor and a couple of X-Men arrived at the gates, casually dressed. I said, "You don't know it yet, but we need each other." I also had some ability to block telepaths, some of which was trained. I let down my guard so the professor could sense my honesty, but I kept a few things back. After a short conversation with the others, someone else showed up. I could smell his cigar from a mile away. It was the legendary Wolverine, or Logan. He seemed intrigued by who I really was, and I was curious if he'd figure out the family connection. He asked who I was, and the others filled him in. The professor said, "I sense he's holding something back, but it's personal. He'll share when he's ready." The gate opened, and I walked in. The professor added, "We don't have any spare rooms, but you can stay in a converted dorm room." I didn't mind, I was just glad to be there. Logan spoke up, "I'll take him to his room." The others seemed surprised, but I followed him inside. As we walked, Logan explained things, but didn't say much until we reached my room. When the door closed, he turned to me and said, "There's something about you, kid. You remind me of someone, but I can't place who. I trust you, and if you don't give me a reason not to, you've got my friendship." As he left, I said, "It's good to see you again, Logan. My dad said to say hello if I ever ran into you." He paused, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes, but he left without saying a word. The room was cozy but pleasant. A young man named Peter, whom I recognized as Colossus, and a girl who introduced herself as Jade, came to help. Peter transformed and did most of the heavy lifting as we moved up the extra bed and brought in a desk and computer. They referred to me as Dr. Lamb, but I told them David was just fine when I wasn't in a classroom setting. I knew they'd ask me to teach biology to the students, especially since it was my field of expertise. Once everything was set up, it was time for dinner. I noticed there weren't any formal seating arrangements, just sit wherever you like. I joined Logan, Jade, Peter, and a girl who appeared to be around 13. Her name was Kalia, but everyone called her Ariana. She was of average size for her age, with blonde hair and blue eyes. She leaned in and whispered to Jade before asking me shyly, "Are you the one they say can help people with their powers?" I nodded and replied, "I sure am." I guess that's why Jade invited me to dinner. She nodded, and Jade blushed, caught in the act. I added, "Since tomorrow is an off day from school, why don't you come by where I'll be setting up my lab?" We finished our meal, and I returned to my room. I logged into the secure server to communicate with my parents. I told them, I'm in. Logan might figure out who I really am before I'm ready to ask for help, but so far, everything's good. I really like it here and am happy I came. After ending the connection, I surfed the web for a while before heading to bed. It had been a long day. The next morning, after breakfast, Ariana joined me to check out my new lab. I was pleased to find that casual dress was the norm around here. I had also met most of the original X-Men who had been off on a mission. Jean told me, I have a feeling that when you finally decide to tell the professor and me everything, it will be an incredible story. I smiled and said, you have no idea. I met Hank McCoy, who was one of my idols, and told him so. He walked with Ariana and me since his lab was nearby. I was curious to see his blue fur up close, but it didn't seem strange, more like a natural part of him. He showed us around his lab, and when we returned to mine, I was pleased to see it set up similarly. It had a small office with a computer and a ton of equipment, including some I had only seen in a couple of other places, one of which only 9 people had ever witnessed. Hank and Ariana helped me get everything organized, and then Hank went back to his lab. Ariana and I sat down in my office, and I asked, so, tell me about your problem. I already had her file pulled up on my computer, but I wanted to hear it from her. She hesitated for a moment before saying, it all started with a lightning strike near me. We were playing softball during gym class, and we shouldn't have been out there with the storm so close. I was batting when the lightning struck. Instead of it hurting me like it did to the others, I just kept going. I hit the ball so far it disappeared from sight. I could feel the power inside me, but when I looked around, some of the others were on the ground, including the teacher. I ran for help and found I could run way faster than usual. Not as fast as Quicksilver, but still pretty fast. The problem was, since I'd never done that before, I didn't stop right and slammed into a wall. It hurt, but I knew I should have been badly injured, but I wasn't. I guess that's what they call invulnerability. I got help and hoped no one saw it, but they did. That's when the rumors started. I'd been popular before, but now people not only avoided me, they taunted me. My parents freaked out and took me to the hospital, but the powers wore off. I was just a normal girl again. Then 2 people approached me. One was Emma Frost, who almost convinced my parents to send me to her school. But when the professor came, I knew I could trust him. He brought Jade along, and she showed me her powers and told me how the school had helped her. I convinced my parents to send me here, and I found out about Emma Frost and the Hellfire Club. Now, here I am. Dr. McCoy has done some tests and discovered that not only electricity but other types of energy trigger my powers. We haven't figured out the upper limit yet, but we haven't pushed it too far either. I hope you can help me learn to control it. I listened closely to her story and could hear the desperation in her words. In some ways, it was a plea for normalcy, something I could never have again. I could pass for normal, but I carried too much weight on my shoulders. Still, maybe I could help her. I told her, what I think might work is giving you small amounts of energy. I'll focus on you, and my powers should help stretch your abilities beyond the limits you've been willing to risk. But it'll take time to set everything up. We can start in the morning. Her face brightened, and she left with a bounce in her step. I spent the rest of the day in the danger room working on a new program. It was designed to help Ariana train freely. As I was finishing up, Logan showed up and said, I was about to hit the gym, kid. Want to watch? I replied, I wouldn't last in your workout, but if you're up for a shooting program, I'll surprise you. He set up the computer, and we went in. This time, the room was transformed into a miniature town, and a couple of blasters were waiting for us. Suddenly, both alien and human villains began appearing, and we started taking them down. I wasn't matching Logan's skill, but my reflexes, thanks to my genetic enhancements, kept me going. I think he recognized some of my moves. When we finished, he said, You're good, kid. Better than most. I also recognize some of your moves, but I can't place them yet. But I'll figure it out. I replied, you'd better. The time's coming when I'll have to tell you, but for now, it would be a distraction. We walked to the dining room and had dinner, and I spent some time getting to know more of the students before heading to bed. The next morning, after breakfast, I met Ariana in the lab. Hank McCoy and the professor were there too. I explained my plan, and then Hank and I gave Ariana a full physical. After that, we headed to the danger room, where I loaded my program. Ariana and I entered, while Hank and Xavier went to the observation booth. I let Hank control the energy input. I watched as Ariana used her powers unassisted. She struggled with controlling both her speed and strength, but her invulnerability protected her. I had Hank power it down, and we took a break while her powers wore off. Then we went back in, and this time, I focused on her as the energy increased. As she started again, I established a limited telepathic link with her. Her rhythm improved, and her strength grew as the energy built up. Her invulnerability also increased, preventing any harm while she trained. I warned her, I can sense that you're getting overconfident. You need to guard against that. Otherwise, this is going great. It won't be long before we won't need the link anymore, you'll be fine on your own. She grinned and said, that was amazing. I'll try to take it slow like you said, but I want to show everyone what I can do. I replied, you can bring Jade and some of your other friends to watch while we train. Then you can work with them and learn how to be part of a team without hurting anyone. We spent the next couple of days working out, and then took a break. I took Jade, Ariana, and Peter into the city. I let myself get dragged into some shopping, and we went to see a movie. But things took a turn for the worse. The assassination attempt I'd been expecting came. Peter and Jade took out a couple of lesser supervillains, but Ariana and I ended up facing Nitro. He said, I don't know why they want you dead, and frankly, I don't care. You're dead. I could feel he was about to explode. It would have killed me, and dozens of people on the crowded street. As he detonated, Ariana jumped in front of me and absorbed the blast. She was hurt, but her powers protected her. I knew this might push her limits, but I didn't know what to do. Nitro reformed and prepared to explode again. Let's see what an all-out blast can do, he said, shifting into a gaseous form. Ariana jumped into the gas, and I screamed, no. I tried to pull her back, but the pain was unbearable. I could swear I heard two screams, ours. It felt like my body was torn apart and then put back together. Then, everything went blank. I don't know how long it was, but I eventually felt myself drifting in a trance, somewhere between time and space. I saw Ariana, unconscious or comatose, drifting beside me. Then I heard a voice. It was Nitro. He said, where the hell are we, and what did you do to me? I replied, I don't know either, but we need to figure it out together. He spat, the hell with that. I'll kill you, then figure the rest out. He tried to explode again, but it didn't work. That's when I realized we were somehow linked in a shared consciousness. I understood I could use my abilities to force him out. He fought back, but I could feel Ariana helping. It was a battle, but eventually, Nitro disappeared. I don't know where he went, but I'm sure he didn't go easy. I wondered if I would ever see him again. Then, I heard voices again, and slowly regained consciousness. Jean, Hank, and the professor were standing over me. I realized I was strapped to a table. Jean asked, who are you, and what happened to Dr. Lamb and Ariana? Where did they go? I had no idea what they were talking about, but I was frustrated being tied down. I broke free with ease, surprising even myself. When Hank tried to grab me, I tossed him aside, unaware of how strong I had become. I could feel Jean and the professor trying to use their mental powers, but they had no effect. I recognized the isolation chamber in the lab. Without thinking, I tested my strength and ripped the door off. Something was clearly wrong. I rushed out of the lab, but Xavier had already summoned the X-Men. Peter asked Jade, "Who is she?" "She looks familiar, but I know I've never seen her before." Then, I felt hits from all directions, but they barely affected me, mostly just pain. I managed to get some space from them and approached a mirror. I had to understand why they didn't recognize me. Looking back from the mirror, I saw a beautiful young woman. She had the same bronze skin as my mother and the muscle tone she had passed on. But my old brown hair and eyes, which I had kept to protect my identity growing up, were still there. That's when the second wave of X-Men arrived, led by Storm. But her elemental powers weren't having much effect. I had a feeling part of me was Ariana, and she should have amplified my strength. Instead, it felt like I'd reached my limit. But I wasn't about to give up without a fight. Then, someone yelled, "Stop." We all turned to see Logan standing there, shaking his head. He said, "Well, I'll be damned. I was just about to figure out who you were. Whatever happened to you must be one hell of a story. But you're the spitting image of your mom." I looked around and said, "Finally, someone's listening. Logan, you better tell them because they'll never believe it from me." He smiled and replied, "No wonder I trusted you from the start. Your dad was one of the first true superheroes, after Tarzan and the Shadow. I fought alongside him in World War II, along with Steve Rogers, better known as Captain America. I'm glad you remember meeting me when you were little, right before you both disappeared in 1950. We searched for you, but we eventually had to move on. But now, look at you. You're going to have to explain what happened to you, your mom, and your dad." He turned to the others and said, "Don't worry about her, folks. She's somehow a mix of David and Ariana." "And David?" "He's the son of one of my greatest friends, Doc Savage. You might as well get comfortable, because I have a feeling this is going to take a while." After Logan backed me up, I started telling my story. But Jade pointed out something I hadn't realized. Somehow, after the accident, I was still wearing my clothes from when I was David, and they didn't fit right anymore. She turned to the professor and said, "How about I grab something from the common room for her to wear? At least she'll be dressed and more comfortable by lunch." I agreed. We headed to the common room, a place where people left their outgrown clothes after they'd been washed, so someone in need could pick them up. I felt a bit embarrassed as Jade measured me, but I realized I had no choice. We were both women now, and I had to get used to it. After that, I went to my room and took a shower. I noticed something similar to my mom. She barely had any body hair. I didn't need to shave much, just like her, and my dad and I had the same trait. It must have been genetic. Once I cleaned up, I got out of the shower and dried off. There was a note from Jade saying, "You weren't hard to find clothes for, you have normal proportions. 36B bra, size 6 panties, and a medium in general." I put on the panties, and while the bra was trickier, I managed to fasten it behind my back. The clothes Jade had left for me were simple, a pair of jeans and a loose-fitting blouse. The blouse wasn't tight, but the jeans couldn't hide the fact that I now had a more shapely figure. Oh well, if that was the worst of my worries, I could live with it. I went outside and found Jade waiting. She smiled and said, "I knew you'd look pretty once we got you sorted. So, what do we call you?" I thought for a moment and said, "How about Pat, after my mom, for now?" We went to the dining room, where lunch was just starting. Logan saw me and seemed a bit surprised. He called for everyone to be quiet, and then Jade introduced me as Pat. We went over to Logan's table, where he'd saved a couple of seats. He said, "You chose your mom's name, huh? I hope that doesn't mean what I think it does." I replied, "Can I eat first, and then I'll explain everything?" He nodded, and as I walked up to the buffet, I realized just how hungry I was. I had expected that, as a girl, I would eat less, but this new body had a different metabolism. I loaded up my plate with salad, pork chops, fried potatoes, broccoli, and a piece of cake for dessert. By the time I finished, everyone else was done eating. I got up and noticed a microphone at one end of the room. I turned it on and began my story. My name is legally David Lamb, but I was born Clark Savage III. I'm the son of Doc Savage. For those of you who don't know who my dad is, that's your homework for tonight. But I bet Logan would love to share some stories. There was a laugh from the crowd, and I got a smile from Logan. I was born during World War II, in 1943. I know it probably seems strange that I looked 23 when I was David, but I'll explain. Both my dad's marriage to his cousin Pat, my mom, and my existence were kept secret, known only to his 5 best friends and Logan. If anything had happened to him during a mission, Dad knew Logan would be able to get word to Mom since he had a better chance of surviving with his healing powers. I paused for a moment before continuing. The war ended, and they didn't see each other for 4 or 5 years. The only other superhero Dad had known closely, the real Captain America, had disappeared. Dad spotted the new one right away, and although he trained him, he stopped taking direct missions after capturing Hitler. Logan came by one more time to debrief Dad after a mission where he investigated an underworld that looked like hell. That's when I met him. I was 7. Mom and I had already gone into hiding because we were being pursued by some enemies. Dad's 5 assistants had been disappearing, except for Johnny. We tracked him down, but found him dead, surrounded by an unusual amount of blood, definitely not just his. He had taken down a lot of people before he died, but his enemies had taken the bodies. Monk, Zeke, Gavin, and Long Tom, one by one, they disappeared. Some massive organization, so far-reaching that no one could hide from it, had tracked them down. We retreated to the Arctic, to Doc's Fortress of Solitude. But, eventually, they found us there too. I wanted to fight, but Dad and Mom locked me in some underground chamber. I was only 7, and though I felt I was too old to cry, I did anyway. I was terrified, for my parents, and for myself. Then the chamber door opened, and men in strange uniforms and masks dragged me out. I struggled as fiercely as I could for someone my age and with the training I'd already received. I managed to injure a few of them before they injected me with something, and I went limp. I didn't lose consciousness right away, so I saw them carry my parents out, unconscious, and I noticed bodies everywhere. My dad had clearly decided that whatever was happening was more important than sticking to his rule about only using lethal force as a last resort. Just before they carried me outside through the hatch, I blacked out. I briefly woke up in a massive laboratory. I saw Dad's surviving men, and my parents, each in individual chambers. They looked like they were asleep, but Dad had once taught me about suspended animation. I remembered that Monk had once perfected a gas that could put someone in a deep sleep without aging them. I realized that's what was happening. I was being carried toward another chamber, and though I didn't let them know I was awake, I overheard them. Even though the boss is missing, we need to keep them alive. We know he's alive and will want to deal with them himself when we find him. That's when I started fighting again, but it was useless. They forced me into the chamber and strapped me in, designed specifically for my size. I struggled until the gas took effect, and everything went black again. I took a brief pause, and when I started talking again, I was bombarded with questions. It had been 60 years since these events, and people wanted to know how I went from then to now, still only 23. I drank some lemonade to calm myself before continuing. The next thing I remember, my mom was carrying me across a desert. It was a barren, desolate place. She was staggering, and when she saw I was awake, she put me down for a moment. I asked her what had happened. She said, "I don't know." I woke up, and my chamber had malfunctioned. Somehow, I woke up instead of staying asleep and dying. It seems whoever captured us left us on automated systems, checking in on us from time to time. I saw Doc and the others, still in their chambers. I knew I was better off trying to get help alone, but I couldn't leave you. I didn't know it would take this long to find help. I don't even know where we are. It's somewhere I've never seen before. Once I was fully awake, we walked on. There was no clear direction, just whichever path was easiest. Eventually, we found ourselves on a highway, but it seemed deserted, like it led nowhere. We took a right, thinking it might lead to something better, but we were dying from dehydration. After a while, Mom collapsed. She was done, and even at 7, I knew it. I started crying, begging her to get up, but she didn't. She told me I had to keep going. I had to find help, rescue Dad, and figure out who had done this to him. I knew she was right. As the son of Doc Savage, I understood responsibility even at that young age. I managed to drag her into some shade, then set off alone. But after several more hours, I had to lie down, thinking I could rest for just a few minutes. If only I had known what would happen next. I woke up in a hospital bed, disoriented and panicking. I had no idea where I was, and I didn't even remember who I was. Tubes and monitoring wires were attached to me. A nurse came in immediately, and she said, "Good, you're awake. I've already called the doctor. This is a small town, he'll be here soon." Not long after, the doctor arrived, along with a man who introduced himself as Sheriff Lamb. The doctor checked me over, and then the sheriff asked if I'd be willing to talk. He seemed like a kind man, and something about him made me trust him. I said, "I need to tell you something. I don't know who I am. I don't remember anything about myself." They told me the sheriff found me lying by the side of the road while he was patrolling, barely alive. They couldn't figure out where I had come from. I knew there was something important I needed to tell them, but I couldn't remember what. It was gone. They asked me basic questions about the year, 1950, of course, and who the president was, Harry Truman. Any 7-year-old knew that. But when I answered, they exchanged strange looks. I asked what was wrong, and the nurse left the room, only to return with a calendar showing 1985, along with a newspaper mentioning Ronald Reagan's second inauguration. Ronald Reagan? Wasn't he the guy in a movie I watched with my mom, about a man and a monkey? I said, "I may be 7, but this isn't funny." They told me they were wondering if I was playing a joke or if the heat had caused memory loss and left me unbalanced. I won't go into all the details, but I eventually accepted that it was indeed 1985. Somehow, I had been living in 1950 and had somehow jumped to 1985. I quickly adapted to the present because I realized I was incredibly intelligent. After searching for any trace of my parents or family and coming up empty, the kind sheriff and his wife, who had never been able to have children, adopted me. They were loving, and I grew to love them in return. Then, when the time came, they told me the truth. They told me how I had mumbled about my mom being in the desert. They managed to trace me and finally found her, barely alive. She was almost comatose but regained enough consciousness to speak briefly. She told them she had no idea where the lab was. It turned out that the doctor's father had once worked with my dad on an adventure years ago and had saved his life. The sheriff's father had also been saved by Dad during the war. There was no question that they would take me in. They searched for the lab but had no luck. They didn't know who was behind the events, and after my mom died, they decided to trust no one. When the X-Men became well known, they realized some of my traits indicated I was a mutant. They debated contacting you all but decided to let me choose whether or not to do it myself. When you never tried to reach me, they realized I must have some ability to conceal myself. After they told me the truth, I started to remember. I wasn't angry with them, I understood their reasoning. I was definitely my father's son in that way. I went through college, and then I used an old favor from my adopted dad to pull a satellite over a place I thought might be a refuge. I remembered my dad's fortress of solitude in the Arctic, but when I got there, it was obvious it had been destroyed. There was nothing but a crater. So, I came here, and the rest, as you know, is history. When I arrived, I knew that you, Logan, might figure it out quickly, but I wanted to wait to avoid drawing attention from our enemies. And that's it. As for why I'm like this now, I only have a few guesses. After finishing my long story, I collapsed into a chair, feeling emotionally drained. I was in a body that wasn't even mine, and I had just shared my past with so many people. Professor Xavier said, "I think we should let you rest for a while. You can stay in your room as David for now, though I'm not sure what we'll do until we figure out how to change you back and get Ariana back. First, rest, and then maybe you can go with some of the others and get more clothing." I went back to my room, but everything felt different now. I was seeing it through different eyes. I sat down at my desk and turned on the computer. What on earth was I going to tell my parents? This wasn't going to be easy to explain. I sent them a long email, including a picture, so they could at least see the resemblance to my mom. Then I turned off the computer and felt so stressed and tired that I didn't want to move. Suddenly, I burst into tears. A part of me knew it was probably because I was a new girl and hormones were involved, but it didn't matter. I sobbed and threw myself on the bed, hugging a pillow. I must have been heard because someone knocked on the door. I ignored them, but they didn't leave. Finally, I yelled, "Go away! Leave me alone!" They ignored me and came in anyway. It was Jade. She said, "I knew this would happen. I'm not leaving. You need a friend right now, even if we're not the same age." She came over, wrapped her arms around me, and sat on the bed. We stayed like that for a while until I fell asleep. It showed how much the ordeal had taken out of me that, when I woke up, it was already morning. I was in bed with a blanket over me. There was a note from Jade on the desk. "I hope it's okay that Aurora helped me get you into bed. You were out completely. Have breakfast whenever you get up," and then she said she'd drive us into the city for some shopping. I felt much better. I showered, then changed into a clean pair of panties and a bra, followed by a sundress. I don't know why I chose the dress, it just looked nice and showed off the bronze skin of my new body. I went to the dining room, found something to eat, and then looked for Jade. I found her in the library, flipping through a theoretical book on merging two life forms. The book looked familiar because I had written it. She turned around when she heard me and gave a start. She said, "You're beautiful. If you're stuck as a girl, you don't have to worry about that. I was just reading your book. You knew this might happen someday, didn't you?" I replied, "I couldn't have known for sure, but I found an old, obscure book by my dad, and it mentioned this. I just carried the theory further. Now, I could really use a change of scenery. Where's Aurora?" We went to find her and took off for NYC. I didn't want to waste too much time or money because I figured that Hank McCoy or I could come up with something. Plus, they knew Reed Richards and a guy named Peter Parker. I wasn't sure what was so special about him, but they said his knowledge and perspective could help. It turned out they used the shopping trip as an excuse to visit the Baxter building. They knew I'd be nervous meeting Reed Richards, and they were right. But he did everything he could to put me at ease. He was familiar with some of my work, and we immediately hit it off. With my sizes, Jade and Aurora went off with Susan Richards to shop for me and themselves. Then, another guest arrived. I was surprised to see Spider-Man web-sling onto a ledge outside the window. Reed let him in. He said, "This must be her, or him, or whatever. I don't know what you think I can do that you guys can't." I looked at him and said, "So the scientist, Peter Parker, is also Spider-Man. Considering the similarities in the knowledge you both have, I should have figured it out." He removed his mask and put on a lab coat. I was thoroughly examined, hooked up to equipment both familiar and new. We discussed the results, but there was nothing to indicate I had ever been two different people other than some recessive DNA from my parents that the accident had triggered. Even that, we couldn't explain. By then, Jade, Aurora, and Susan had returned. They had bought a few outfits, which I tried on. I felt a little self-conscious when I found a bikini they had gotten for me. It fit perfectly. Meanwhile, Reed and Sue were busy crafting a costume made of unstable molecules, like the Fantastic Fours, but with an X-Men design. The belt had an empty space for a letter. Jade said, "Once you decide on a code name, you can put the first letter on there." I only had one thought on my mind. I wanted to get back to the mansion, hit the danger room, and start testing my powers. We had lunch with the Richards in the city before heading home. I was eager to start the tests, but Hank insisted on running some checks on the data from the city first. There was no new information. I changed into my new costume and entered the danger room, with Logan joining me. He said, "I stand the best chance of handling whatever we throw at you. I want to see how good you really are, up close and personal." We went through a series of tests. My reflexes were faster than I had ever been, a combination of my original abilities and Ariana's enhancements. Then we moved on to strength. I punched a strength measuring pad several times. I glanced through the window where Hank and the others were standing, and saw their jaws drop. Suddenly, I was slammed from behind. I felt Wolverine's claws scrape across my back. To my amazement, that was all they did. My invulnerability was unbelievable. How was this possible without being some oversized girl? Then, he attacked again. I knew it was part of the test, but my reflexes took over. I spun around and struck him. I had no idea of my own strength. I sent him crashing across the room, where he hit the wall hard enough to kill anyone else. I ran to him, shouting his name, and carried him out of the danger room to the infirmary. Hank and I quickly determined that with his healing powers, Logan would be fine. I looked at Hank and said, "What did the monitor say when you were testing my strength?" "I'm not sure I want to know, considering how my invulnerability kept me from breaking every bone in my hand and arm after hitting him like that." Hank replied, "As you know, we classify strength in heroes and villains by 10 class. But there's a class all its own, that Hulk, Thor, and a few others belong to. I'm not saying you're as strong as them, but you may be in that league." That sent me into a panic. I rushed back to my room, wanting to hide from everything. It was a miracle I hadn't damaged anything or hurt anyone yet. When people tried to knock on my door, I demanded to be left alone. I spent the next 3 days filling pages of notes on paper and my computer, not eating or sleeping. Finally, I heard a knock, and found Jade standing there with tears streaming down her face. She pulled me into a hug, and then noticed I was smiling. She asked, "Why are you smiling?" I answered, "Because I've figured it out. I've found a way to switch back to David and Ariana. I can't live like this all the time." She responded, "But what about you, as you? You could be one of the most powerful heroes." I said, "That's the incredible part. I think I've figured out how to retain the ability to still become this person after I separate. But it will depend on what Ariana thinks when she's back." I took all the results to Hank and sat back as he reviewed them. Finally, he said, "I knew you were ahead of me in some ways. Are you sure this will work?" I nodded. "About 90%. If we can remove the energy from me, store it, and then separate the DNA, Ariana and I should both return to ourselves. My dad was working on something similar, but couldn't make it work. With your help and some of your own research, we can do it." We spent the next couple of weeks working on the plan. I wanted to work full-time, but after having a solution, I decided to rest and avoid making mistakes. The biggest fear was that when we removed the energy, Nitro might reform. But when Professor Xavier and Jean scanned me, they confirmed what I already knew: he was gone. The main concern was the DNA separation. Would we each truly be ourselves? Finally, the day arrived. We attached a special pack to the belt of my costume, with wires leading to sensors on my chest. I was placed in a chamber surrounded by sensors, and a device I had designed was ready. It was supposed to remove the energy and separate our DNA, reforming us in 2 chambers, one for David, and one for Ariana. I checked everything for the 3rd time, but deep down, I wasn't as sure as I wanted to be. But I couldn't let anyone see that. I stepped into the chamber and lay down on the table, trying to keep my voice steady as I nodded to Hank. There was no way to do this gradually, it had to be all or nothing. He pressed a button, and I felt a slight buzz before an overwhelming drain of strength hit me. That was expected, but then the pain came. I screamed, feeling as though I was being torn apart again, just as bad as when I first became like this, maybe worse. I heard Jade yelling at Hank to turn it off, but I knew he couldn't. Doing so would likely kill me. Finally, I blacked out, mercifully escaping the agony. When I regained consciousness, I realized I was back in my room. I looked at the clock and was shocked to see I had been out for 3 days. Everything around me felt different. The bed, the room, it all felt unfamiliar. I pulled back the covers and realized I was wearing a strange nightgown. That's when it hit me, this wasn't David's body, or even Pat's. It was too small. I stumbled to the bathroom and saw Ariana's face staring back at me. What had happened? Was she in my body now? I staggered into the hallway, and Jade, who had just come back to check on me, rushed over and caught me as I nearly fell. What happened? Where is my body? I asked, panic rising in my chest. She looked at me with concern. Oh no, it's worse than we feared. You're David, right? I nodded. Yeah. She continued, we didn't know who you'd be when you woke up. The problem is, only Ariana's body survived the experiment. Hank thinks your body's DNA got caught up in the energy field. Are you sure it's just you in there? I closed my eyes and searched my mind, finding no trace of Ariana's consciousness, just a few lingering memories. I have this awful feeling that since she was in a coma when our bodies merged, the shock of what happened here may have finished her off, I said. But what does this mean? If my DNA is stuck in the energy matrix, why did my consciousness separate? And does this mean I'm a girl forever? I didn't know how much more I could handle. Maybe coming to the X-Men hadn't been such a great idea after all. Within weeks of arriving, I had faced Nitro, and somehow, it had changed me into an 18-year-old girl. Now, in an attempt to reverse it, Ariana was dead, and I was stuck in her body. I felt like I was reacting like the young girl I was now, and I wanted nothing more than to curl up and cry, so I did. Jade wrapped her arms around me and held me for a while, and it helped, just having her there. She had joined the X-Men around the same age and was only a few years older than me now. After I calmed down a bit, the professor, Hank, Logan, Reed Richards, and Peter Parker entered. They all seemed uncomfortable, and it was Hank who finally spoke up. We heard what you said about Ariana being dead, and I'm afraid we agree. As for your body, it's probably still part of the energy matrix. We've checked with other experts, and the consensus is clear, no one's seen anything like this before. I asked, so how do I get my body back? I didn't sign up for being a 13-year-old girl. You know what we need to do, we have to reverse the experiment, release the energy back into me, and go from there. Hank shook his head. I was afraid you'd think that, but we can't let you try that. Your judgment is impaired. I know you won't want to admit it, but part of you is acting like a little girl just 5 minutes ago. We need to make the decisions for you until you can adjust. I stood up and said, the hell with that. I'm still David inside of here. Now, let's stop this nonsense, and I'll go to my lab and figure it out. I started walking toward the door, but Hank grabbed my arm. I still thought I had my powers, so I tried to throw him off, but it was no use. The more he held me back, the angrier I got. It didn't help. Finally, I realized how ridiculous I must have looked, especially in a nightgown. I stopped struggling and stormed back to my room. When I got there, I found that a lot had changed in the few days I had been unconscious. Someone, probably Jade, had moved Ariana's clothes into my room. I sifted through them, found a pair of panties, a sports bra, a t-shirt, and some shorts. I didn't want to overcomplicate things, I just wanted to get out of the nightgown. I felt a bit better after changing, then put on sandals and went back into the hallway to find everyone waiting for me. Jade said, we figured you'd come out after getting some rest and changing. Now listen to Hank, he knows what's best. I knew she was right, but I wasn't happy about it. I walked over to the others and said, I'm sorry for freaking out. But I refused to stay like this forever. there has to be a way to reverse this. Hank responded, the best chance may be in your father's papers. He was possibly the greatest scientific genius ever. You need to go through them again. It'll give you something to focus on while we figure out how we got here. The problem was, I had an almost perfect memory for everything I had ever read. I was more upset that the majority of my dad's work had been lost with the Fortress of Solitude. I thought his old headquarters in the Empire State Building had been remodeled too many times to have anything left. But the idea that Dad wouldn't have some sort of backup bothered me. I sat down in the easy chair, the one that had always been my thinking chair, but it only made me feel worse. I was 13 again. The chair seemed to swallow me. I got into it anyway, trying to think of where Dad might have created a backup fortress. Instead, I just started to wallow in my situation.